All right, welcome everybody to Shadowward Podcast episode 4. At the usually scheduled crappy time and crappy day for everybody. Thanks for joining, everybody. Yeah, I know it's been a while, but we haven't had too much to talk about, and I've been super busy IRL. But now we have lots to talk about. So we have quite a bit going on. So today we're going to cover a little bit of 10.07 and kind of what's coming this week and chat with people about that. And then most of the podcast we're going to be talking about like how 10.1 looks, how people feel about it, what are some, common complaints or maybe things we're hoping to see them change before it goes live. We still have probably a bit before 10.1. I think a lot of people are saying like late May, mid-June, early June, something like that. So we'll see. But without further ado, let's just introduce my guests officially. You guys probably already have seen these guys if you've been around the Discord, but Ellie, how's it going? How are you doing?
I'm doing very well today, thank you very much.
Good. All right, we're gonna get into it. I know you're a resident no Mindster expert, so you got to help us on how to play keys in next season. So,
All right, okay.
and then we have Saeldur with us as well. Saeldur, how's it going?
It's doing okay.
Are you gonna make it? I feel bad. You said you're really tired. Did I pick a bad time?
No, I'm just tired always. It's fine.
Okay. All right. Well, next time we'll do it at what's your usual DGen hours? Like 6 a.m. We'll do it then.
Like 3 a.m. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I'm fine for that as well, honestly.
Probably better for everyone that's watching too.
There you go. Perfect. Yeah, we'll just have everyone stay up really late. All right, so before we get into kind of 10.1, which is, I think, where a lot of the discussion will happen, Ellie wanted us to cover 10.07 briefly. There are quite a lot of changes happening in 10.07, just not for Shadow Priest.
Yeah, that's...
So I don't know, like I guess like as far as Shadow specific changes, the only thing is bug fixing, right? So I think we have Void Eruption damage bug fix, which is kind of like nothing. Shadowy apparitions will now deal insanity when they hit the target, not when they get generated, which was a fun one to find. And then the N'Zoth bug, I think, is also fixed. I think a lot of people probably ran into the N'Zoth bug on like Council or whatever, whenever you have two Shadow Priests running N'Zoth. So that is fixed as well. I think that's it as far as bug fixes.
Yeah, those are the only bugs that have been fixed. I'm kind of disappointed to see Shadowy Apparitions return to Insanity Generation on hit compared to on cast, because like you do waste a lot of insanity on ghosts that are just never going to hit targets because they die before they reach them. So I'm kind of mildly disappointed about that, but I also understand that in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of just a drop in the ocean, really, compared to the insanity that we do generate from ghosts right now.
Yeah.
There's one other bug. The Void Eruption bug got fixed. The 4 bolts not 2.
Yeah,
Okay.
which is kind of like, I don't think anyone really noticed it. It was just kind of like a really random thing we found like beta, and it was just like, why is it like this?
Yeah,
it was enough that it pushes DA to be ahead again, like by a decent margin, though.
Oh
yes.
Yeah,
like 0.6% or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just dumb math. Like the thing that I guess surprised me initially, but then when we found out what was happening in 10.1, didn't surprise me at all anymore. Screams is still bugged.
Oh yeah, they don't care. Yeah, they have decided they don't care.
Yeah, they don't care because they're removing it anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, Screams of the Void currently on live, and then also on 10.07. If you have Screams of the Void and Mental Decay, and you're pressing Mind Flay, you don't get any extra dot tick for Shadowward Pain.
Doesn't it like revert, like make it act like it's got no haste at all or something?
It does some really weird stuff. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah,
it's not
like
great.
Something to do with like increasing the tick rate of a spell while simultaneously extending it by 1 second every tick.
Yeah,
just does dumb math, and Blizzard hasn't worked out how to make that actually function.
But like,
properly.
What's funny is like Vampiric Touch works.
Yes,
it's
only
not like it's
only Shadow of Pain.
It's just Shadow. Yeah, I don't get it. I don't know how they messed it up like that. But I think come 10.1, they were like, all right, we have to redesign Shadow Priest because we can't fix this Screams bug. So we're gonna.
Our headcanon is that's the entire reason they redesigned.
It was just Screams, yeah. Because now in Screams for 10.1, just to go a little early, they've changed it to where it's just a buff now. So when you press Devouring Plague, you get a buff for 3 seconds. That increases the tick rate of all your dots. So
yeah.
Funny enough, everything that was bugged, like Mind Meld, Shadowy Insight, they basically fixed every single bug for Shadow Priest, but they only fixed one of the bugs by fixing it. The rest they fixed by deleting the talents.
True, actually. Yeah, we have our issue tracker in GitHub. I had to make a new label that's like, this talent was deleted, or like this was deleted, or to be deleted, right? Because it doesn't matter in 10.1.
Yeah, it was great. Like we're down to like 3 bugs on the tracker, I think.
It's pretty nice, yeah.
Yeah, we're down a lot of bugs, but we're also probably going to find a ton more.
Oh,
I'm
sure.
That's going to be fun. But yes, the other major thing coming in 10.07 will be the Onyx Annulet, which is a 404 to
424
424 eye level ring
Yeah.
with various properties and effects that Blizzard are kind of touting as an item that the majority of players are going to get use or value out of throughout the run-up to Season 2. However, that does not appear to be the case with current tuning.
Yeah. So, if you guys played in, was it BFA? We had that punch card trinket. It's kind of similar to that, where like the ring itself just has stamina, and you can put 3 stones in them, and each stone has like some like cantrip effect. So like a damage proc or a shield proc or some utility thing. But the important thing is the ring has literally no secondary stats. So for anyone that likes secondary stats, particularly haste and mastery, they're like particularly not liking this ring. Some of the effects you can slot into the ring do scale off of like critical strike or versatility. I don't actually think, Sailor, I think you said this, there aren't any, I think, that scale with haste.
No, none of them scale with haste.
So basically us as like a haste mastery spec at, if you, and each stone I forgot to mention can be upgraded. So like they all have base levels, and then you can upgrade them up to do more damage or whatever else it is. So for us, a fully upgraded 424 ring is still a DPS loss by like 2 or 3%.
Yeah, it's like equivalent to like a 392 socket ring or something.
That was me being generous, actually. It's much lower than that. I was just trying to make it.
Yeah.
I think it's more like 370 or 360.
It's about 360, yeah.
Yeah,
because I know Devastation Evoker, it's like 369 or something as well. So like, just like specs that scale well with stats just do not want this ring at all.
Yeah, I just wanted to cut our losses because like AoE versus single target, there's a bit of difference. So I was just like, screw it, 392, just to be clear.
It's also worth mentioning that none of the sockets, none of the gems that you can put in the ring that provide a DPS increase provide any amount of stats at all.
Right.
They are all just proc do damage in some convoluted or non-convoluted way.
Yeah. So yeah.
There's some pros and cons to the design of the ring. The major pro to the design of the ring, it comes alongside its like universality, that everybody is going to be using this thing. Ideally, like everybody is going to have access to it.
Yeah.
Yes. And while we want stats for gameplay feel and just the fact they are more valuable to us, when you look at items for the whole player base, it can be quite good at times to make the power on them not stats, and in fact something that doesn't scale with anything really, and is not a percentage of a player's skill expression.
Yeah, I mean we've had that in the past, right? Like essences, you could argue, were kind of like that, where we all had the same essences in BFA, and that kind of thing.
And like a decent chunk of your damage was just like procs that you couldn't control, but were high enough frequency that they didn't have massive variance. Yeah. And you just had like, so like 15% of a person's damage is just set in stone. They don't have to play well to get that. And I think for items that are going to the entire player base, that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the end of the season, so I think they were hoping to give people some kind of like catch up stuff to get them into Season 2, or just give people some form of content to do and farm while we wait for 10.1. So now that all being said, it is kind of suspicious. They've made comments that the ring will be used by the majority of the player base. Obviously, the majority of the player base is not doing a plus 20 key every week in Mythic rating, right?
No. But they have also said that they expect it to be replaced by Mythic Aberrus items.
Yeah, so it does kind of feel like what they're saying and kind of what we're seeing in how it works don't really match. Yeah, so there's certainly a possibility that the rings get buffed. So keep your eye out on that. It's probably still worth it for you. I mean, especially if you just like want something to do. Like it does, like there is content there. It's not like they just give you the ring and all the stones fully upgraded. So you can't do it just for fun, anyways. And then you can farm gear for alts and everything. So yeah.
I think my major concern with the design of the ring is that if they want players, there's two very big concerns I have with it, I guess. If they want everyone to be using it for the remainder of this season, then they need to reconcile with the fact that it's currently a DPS loss of equivalent to like 50 item levels for some specs, and it's already like a 5 to 10 eye level DPS gain for a couple of specs.
Right, and that's what I was saying earlier. Like when they make some of these effects scale with crit, scale with versatility, well, if you're a spec like Outlaw Rogue that's already stacking those stats, the ring is just better for you than other people. So yeah, the design's kind of weird, and I think in general, like it's never fun losing haste, especially as a class like Shadow. So yeah,
that's my other major concern. Is like upgrades should feel good.
Yeah,
and acquiring this item as an upgrade, if it were an upgrade, currently wouldn't feel good.
Yeah,
because it makes your spec play worse for a bunch of damage procs you can't control.
Yeah, and I think like I was also kind of interested when they first announced it, where it's like, oh, maybe this is actually a utility ring for us. You know, maybe we just say screw it and then just socket some like shields procs in there.
I think the damage loss of losing 1200 secondary stats is just enormous.
Yeah, it's like 6 or 7%, I think, wholesale. Like if you don't have any like DPS procs in the ring and you're just doing like a pure defensive thing, you're taking like a 6 or 7% hit to damage, which
it's also not like Shadow was particularly squishy in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of like, oh, that could be a nice thing to use, like for very occasional stuff, but it doesn't seem like it's a fit for that.
There is potentially one combo for that ring that is unethical and like very, very strong, but I haven't been able to get the one gem to test it. There's a gem that states whenever you stand still for 3 seconds, you'll gain a shield. If that gem does not have an internal cooldown and you can cancel the shield, you can trigger the other gem that says whenever you gain an absorb shield, deal damage in an area. But the problem is that gem is melee range only.
Yeah. I don't even know if
So that is one potential combo that does a lot of damage if it works, but it probably doesn't work. I just haven't been able to get that gem.
I mean, even if that does work, that sounds like the sort of thing that Blizzard will squash immediately if they catch wind of it.
Yeah,
it's like 9,000 DPS or something like that. Just by doing that.
I think Blizzard would squash that pretty quickly if they realized.
So yeah, I mean, TLDR though, I think 1007 doesn't really have a whole lot going on for Shadow. A couple bug fixes. There's a ring to farm if you really want to, but really not usable by anyone that has any existing stat ring for the most part. So
what do we think Blizzard should do if they do want to achieve their goals of make the ring usable?
I actually don't want them to. I think I would rather
I don't want them to either.
I'd rather them just scrap it, take the learning, take the L from this, and just move on. In my opinion,
agreed.
I think cantrip effects like the ring that they've added here, that should be exclusive to trinkets. I think doing it like this, where you're losing this many stats on an item, just feels horrible. And I think the punch card trinket was a much better design because of that, if that makes sense. Because then you're weighing it against other cantrip effects.
Yeah, but the punch card trinket also had stats on it. Because your yellow card was stats.
Yeah, but again, that's what I mean. Like I don't think it matters as much when it's on a trinket slot, I guess, is my point.
I think I'd agree. I tend to agree. Like trinkets, people are like kind of used to the understanding that your stats on your trinket kind of ebb and flow based on what you've got and kind of how the expansion progresses. Like whereas rings and jewelry are just known for being like the majority of your secondary stat budget.
Yeah.
And it feels good that you have them optimized. So losing all of that stats just feels really, really counterproductive to like the idea of gear progression to me.
Yeah, and again, it's an in-between season thing. It's not like this is like a core progression system within a season, and they've already mentioned that it's going to be, they're not extending it, right, in season 2.
Yeah, no, I think we're kind of more speaking about feedback for the future when they consider systems like these systems like these to tide things over.
I don't necessarily consider the ring a failure, no matter what happens with it. I think it's actually a fairly decent piece of side content for those that do world content.
Agreed.
Not everybody does raid.
Yeah.
No, I do agree. I agree.
The power level could be slightly off, given it's going to be worse than like 380 eye level rings for a lot of specs.
Yeah.
However,
again, that kind of
at the end of the day, this ring is still going to be fine content for people that do not enter actual endgame content. This will give them something to do for several weeks. There might be achievements to obtain, but the rings, I haven't checked. there's that sort of content available, and therefore I
Yeah.
don't think it's an abject failure, even if we won't use them. And I think that's better that we don't use them, because as soon as
tend to
us
agree as
endgame players use items like this that are not potentially meant for us, it ruins it.
For sure.
Yes, I'd agree. I'd also say that that kind of ties back into the fact that it's loads of cantrip procs, because like in open world content, or players who are doing open world content with arguably unoptimized gear and no particular desire to optimize their gameplay, are going to get more out of something that just provides a fixed amount of flat damage than something they would have to play around or would augment the gameplay that they already have, I guess.
Yeah, and I think like it's cool that they make content that isn't for everyone. Like that's okay. Like like if we just throw our hands up and it's like, yep, this ring's not made for me. That's cool. Like I have no issue with that. As I hope people have fun with it. So
agreed. I just have concerns when Blizzard's recent interviews are saying that everyone should be using this until somewhat into season 2.
Yeah,
and then my alarm bells are going off.
Yeah, we'll see.
And also, I guess even if that's not the case, having an item that scales up to 424 item level, but is still somehow worse than 360, 370 eye level rings, gives a very warped idea of gear progression and is generally just teaching players bad habits from the get-go.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, we'll see where it ends up. It comes up this week, so yeah, who knows? They might buff the crap out of it. We'll see.
They might do, and if they do, I hope they do it by adding stats to it. I hope they do the thing with the legendary ring from the last patch of Legion that everybody got, where it just like split between 3 stats, like haste, crit, mastery. Either they let us pick the stats like they did on the punch card, or they just give us an equal amount of the 3 major stats.
I doubt it.
Screw verse, nobody cares.
Yeah. Anyways, I don't think they're going to spend a whole lot of time on it, because I think really the main focus for them internally is 10.1. So let's kind of dive into that. I'll go to Saeldur first on this, just to kind of let's just talk like initial impressions with it. I know we've kind of talked a lot and given feedback in our posts, but just kind of curious, Saeldur, on your thoughts. Like just in general, do you think the rework is going the next rework for Shadow is headed in the right direction, or kind of just general high level feedback on it?
Yes and no. I think the general direction that the class is moving in is generally a positive direction. I think as a whole, the class is going to be getting better and more focused. The focus there is the important part for me, because the class currently in 10.0 is divided into so many different directions that there isn't really any cohesion or coherence in the talents in the tree, or even the builds we play. Nothing makes sense. So the direction going forwards is better for this. It's significantly better. Everything is more directed. However, I still have concerns with some of the things. Mobility is still possibly going to be an issue. It's kind of back to the days of 9.1 and 9.0, if anyone remembers that the Shadow Priest experience from Shadowlands, where we basically only had Devouring Blade to move. It's similar to that, but we do have Death now, so it's not quite as bad. And so, and based on that, like my feedback initially when we first saw this wasn't overly positive. The movement was really bad. It was really clunky to play. And it didn't feel quite there in that first iteration. But then they released the update a week later, which changed the cooldown on Death, and that genuinely solved so many problems with this spec for me that it feels so much better to play now.
Is that just the cooldown on Death, or do you think that's also Death Speaker as well?
And Death Speaker, I guess.
Oh, and Death Speaker. Death Speaker and Death. It's actually Death Speaker. Quite a lot of it is Death Speaker.
Yeah.
Death Speaker procs are so valuable for movement, as well as they're also something that's helping the direction of the spells. I've complained in the past that Dark Ascension did not have any proper things supporting it. It increased direct damage. We just didn't have direct damage spells. Now we have Mind Spike Insanity, and we have Death Speaker procs. And by God, do Death Speaker procs hit really hard during Dark Ascension. I've had 190k crits in DA.
Yeah, which is much higher than any other direct damage spell we have in the kit. Right?
Yeah, it's pretty insane.
Yeah. Okay, so overall, you think going in the right direction, there's just some things they need to iron out, basically.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It just needs to fix a couple of things.
Okay, Ellipsis, how about you? You kind of in the same boat, or?
I was more pessimistic than Saeldur from the beginning, I have to be honest.
Yep.
Because while I think this is a philosophical improvement, the actual day-to-day button pushing for me personally has seen a decrease in quality. personally.
And is that from losing Surge of Darkness, or what specifically?
Losing Surge of Darkness is a massive part of that.
Yeah.
And also just a general dislike of Mind Spike Insanity as a thing.
Sure.
Because I think that in this sort of attempt to prevent players from using Mind Spike and Mind Flay in the same build, they've been left with two filler spells that no longer have any genuine distinguishing qualities besides potentially the damage amp from Dark Ascension.
Yeah.
Mind Flay has always felt like an iconic spell to me in Shadow, and not casting it at all seems like a flavor failure from me personally.
Because now currently,
Especially
even
with
if you had Mind Spike, you would only ever get Mind Flay and Sanity procs, right? So you would still always weave both. And
in raid single target, especially when you're relatively geared, I'm saying relatively geared because when we move into season 2, like as geared as we are now, that's the baseline in season 2. Things are only going to get more smooth from here on out. You cast Mind Flay Insanity so much that it barely feels like you aren't Mind Flaying. I guess if that makes sense.
For sure. Yeah, we have a
you
lot
always
of
fit one Insanity between your plagues. You're pretty consistent with that. And between Mind Flay Insanity feeling good to press, Surge of Darkness procs being available, and how busy and active the rotation is already, you don't really necessarily find yourself in the situation where you end up hard casting a bad filler, be it Mind Spike or Mind Flay.
Yeah.
So I'm not really on board with their philosophy of how they've decided to solve that, because now we're just hard casting Mind Spike even more often. It just has the word Insanity on the end.
Yeah. So let's kind of dive in deeper to Mind Spike versus Mind Flay. So I think for those that didn't see, like specifically in 10.1, they've said, all right, Mind Spike is now a talent that does give you damage when you take it and fully replaces Mind Flay on the tree. And anything that works with Mind Flay now also works with Mind Spike, which was direct feedback that we gave them. To compensate, or like in addition to that, like you mentioned, they removed Surge of Darkness, which was the main reason we picked it to begin with. And then they also, like I said, they buffed the damage. So talenting Mind Spike is a damage increase just by itself, hard cast over Mind Flay, which is not how it is right now on live. I think they're like basically even.
Basically, even I think the interactions with various talents, specifically manipulation, push it over the edge. Although manipulation used to, but then they put Flay on that as well.
On both, yeah.
It's actually in Flay's favor on live currently.
When you add up interactions, or you just saying base?
Just baseline, but also the interactions help Flay more than
you need Mind Melt to make you press Mind Spike right now.
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
So, but then they're saying, okay, well, if you're gonna spend a talent point, we need to make it worth spending that point, right? So I guess that's why they buffed it. But in turn, in Saeldur, kind of pitch this over to you, because like we've been doing some early stuff with builds, and it seems like Mind Spike's going to be used quite a lot. I don't.
Yeah. Basically, Mind Spike is not necessarily always better, but Mind Spike Insanity is. So whether that's a balanced thing, because going back to what Ellipsis said a minute ago, the difference between Mind Flay Insanity and Mind Spike Insanity isn't big enough of a distinction to make it like a gameplay choice there. It's just Mind Spike Insanity does effectively. Okay, so let me explain how Surge of Insanity now works. So Surge of Insanity upgrades Mind Spike to be a very, very hard hitting spell. Alternatively, it upgrades Mind Flay to be the old Mind Flay Insanity we're used to, which takes 2 globals. Mind Spike Insanity is a single global, and it has all the damage and Insanity in 1 GCD. So that is 8 Insanity versus the 12 for 2 globals on Mind Flay Insanity. That means that the proc is worth 4 Insanity for both cases, whether it takes 2 globals with an MFI and 1 with a Mind Spike Insanity. The MFI does more damage over 2 globals, but it is not significant enough. Now, why does that matter, and how does that tie into our rotation? The answer is death. Now that we have Shadow Word Death, we have a lot of spells in our rotation that just aren't going to be filler. They aren't going to be bad. Therefore, we just don't have the time to press Mind Flay Insanity all the time, which is why we're taking Mind Spike Insanity. Not only that, but Mind Spike Insanity is an instant cast spell. It is buffed by Dark Ascension, and that is a very big positive in the current state of the game, because that's the cooldown we're using.
Wait, Mind Spike Insanity isn't instant, Shadow Death is.
Sorry,
Or
no
did I-
instant. It's a cast. I meant it's a cast, not a channel. Sorry,
Yeah.
that's misspoke. But all of this means it's buffed. It's buffed by Dark
It's a
Ascension.
direct damage spell, I think was what he was getting at.
Yes.
Yeah, I think.
But so there needs to be, to try and get closer to what Ellipsis wants, I think there needs to be a more obvious distinction between Mind Flay Insanity and Mind Spike Insanity to give me a reason to not just talent Mind Spike always. I think potentially something like you make Mind Spike Insanity instant cast, but less damage. You make the Mind Flay Insanity do the same damage per global as a Mind Spike Insanity, but it's not instant cast. So if you know you can get away with being rooted to the ground more often, you can play Mind Flay Insanity and do more damage. Or if the fight needs mobility, you need mobility on something like a Terros fight right now, for example. You take Mind Spike Insanity and it will end up being more damage, even though it's actually less damage. Because the mobility will save you over time.
But that also frees up talent points you wouldn't be putting into Mind Spike to put into other damaging passives to kind of like.
And this would provide a more interesting build, like for diversity and more choice for a player. If you think you are good enough as a player to get away with playing MFI and it would do more damage, you can play it. And I think that would be healthy for the game. However, that's not how it currently works, and this is one of my problems with Surge of Insanity in its current design. And it's not quite what Ellipsis said earlier, but it is like half of what he said earlier, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think my issues are less mechanical and more
yours is flavor.
And flavor as well. Yeah. I mean, I still dislike the lack of movement and stuff, like losing Surge of Darkness, because Surge of Darkness was such a fluid movement ability. It didn't yell at you, press me now. I don't care if you don't need to move right now. Press me now. Which a lot of other procs do. It kind of give you a lot of freedom and flexibility.
That's one really nice thing about the new Surge of Insanity is it stacks to 2. It feels really good.
True.
Yeah, and if they made the spikes, Mind Spike Insanity instant cast, like that would be massive for movement for sure and mobility.
Yeah, I mean they could knock the damage down as well.
And you can bank up those charges not to 3, but at least to 2.
Yes.
And similar lines, if we are talking about mobility, they could also make MFI castable while moving as well, which I know a lot of people would love. Maybe that's too broken.
I think you have to either do one or the other. I don't think that. Maybe. I think that if you give them both mobility options, you've once again kind of removed the distinction between why you would play one over the other.
Yeah. The other suggestion that's been floating around with kind of making Dark Ascension feel, I think, more impactful, they could also make that part of Dark Ascension as well, where pressing DA makes your direct damage spells instant cast. Or something like that.
That would be ludicrous, honestly.
Well, they could, or maybe just do it for Mind Spike. I don't know. Some way to give it synergy. And the other thing too is like, what are we actually getting out of having Mind Spike on the tree? If you get rid of the damage aspect for a second, right?
That's kind of my underpinning concern. Is like,
why is it?
What is the point of this spell?
Yeah, because like today it was there primarily for Surge of Darkness, right? So now that we don't have that, what, like, why is it there?
I think we've kind of covered the major elephant in the corner with regards to Shadow going forward. But I guess, like, do we have any other concerns about the talent tree in general?
Oh, just a few.
Layout. Several about layout.
Yes.
Let's cover dot management first. I think that one's probably something.
Okay, that's fine.
That's the hot button topic. I think there's some development there. So I think, for people that don't currently play without Mindseer on live, I think one of the biggest downsides with dropping Mindseer in any environment in AoE on live is dot management, right? Where you do have to kind of think about how and when you're dotting targets in AoE. Maybe it's a case of like having to cast more hard casted vampiric touches as the tank is pulling, and then you kind of like shadow crash halfway to get you enough of the way there. But that playstyle is something that I think a lot of people are not playing with today on live, but will have to do more of in 10.1. So Ellipsis, you want to kind of talk a little bit about how you feel about the dot management and kind of how that's changing now that we don't have Seer anymore for sure, so that's not an option. But they did change Shadow Crash to be a 20-second cooldown. So is that enough?
Yes. In a sense of dot management, yes. In a sense of gameplay flexibility and having options for the variety of situations that come up in dungeons, no.
Yeah, I think I agree. Say more.
I think that right now, I play a lot of Mythic Plus dungeons around the 25 to 26 level, so I'm not like bleeding edge, but I'm pushing pretty high and
You're
kind
up
of
there, yeah.
doing decent keys, yeah. You ideally should be finding use for both like the Steelers build and the Mindseer build, depending on dungeon and key level at that level.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are pros and cons to both, but they're not as cut and dry as you'd want them to be when looking at lower level keys. In lower level keys, I would suggest running Mindseer pretty much everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
The thing Mindseer does besides just more AoE damage, is it kind of guarantees that every dot that gets applied by either Hardcast, Vampiric Touch, or Shadow Crash is going to remain on that target until the end of the pull. That is like the major draw of Mindseer.
With Mental Decay, specifically.
With Mental Decay, but
yeah.
Yes, you always have Mental Decay when you're playing Mindseer in AoE. This is the other big draw of having Mindseer, is you have a button that hits everything in the pull.
If it's stacked, yes.
If it's stacked, yes.
Yeah.
But if it's stacked is generally not a concern when you're looking at the size of pulls where that's a relevant kind of factor. We're talking like the triple pull at the start of Algathar Academy. If you're doing a particularly spicy double pull at the start of Knockout Offensive, any pulls involving large amounts of like expendable mobs that you get in various keys. Obviously we're getting a new dungeon set in season 2, so like not being able to do the Algathar tree pull very well is kind of moot. Right. But there are going to be situations that come up that are going to be very similar to that throughout Brackenhide Hollow, and probably Neltharian's Lair, given how we used to pull that back in the days in Legion.
Right. So there's kind of two problems, right? The one is they did give us 20-second Shadow Crash, which is barely enough to sustain our 21-second dots, right?
Yes. If you have if you are in combat with 8 things, you will have them dotted all the time.
Yep. But what it's not giving you is that kind of flexibility with, if you add a target or you have more than 8 targets, or let's say something moves or whatever it is. Like you're losing that kind of flexibility, and you do now have to consciously think about dots more than we do today with the Mindseer build.
Yeah. The comparison I would make, I'd say no as well. But the comparison I would kind of semi-make is to the other major dot spec in the game currently, which is Affliction Warlock.
Okay.
Which think a lot about the majority of their dots, and think about a lot of their good high damage, high efficiency 5 to 7 target AoE is focused on good dot management and like juggling everything and playing well. But they also have the ability to just mindlessly spam Seed of Corruption to do semi-efficient damage on lots of targets if the GCD investment for multi-dotting isn't there. Mindseer was our Seed of Corruption equivalent in that sense. It was something to press when the target count exceeded the number you could realistically dot for relevant value. Losing the ability to do damage to anything at all in AoE without having applied dots to it is a pretty major concern, frankly, going forwards.
Yeah, because I think there's a line there, right, of like either dots are easy to spread, but they don't really do a lot of damage, right, because they activate our AoE damage with Psychic Link or whatever.
I'm gonna say Psychic Link is such a powerful tool that dots do a lot of damage by proxy, frankly, for Shadow.
Well, but I think like that's the point of saying like it is you can't do AoE damage without them, right? And I think that's kind of the line of saying like, well, if that's where we're at, you do it should be easier to manage dots, right?
Yeah, the specs effectively target capped at 8 unless you're willing to look into the pros and cons of spending multiple globals on Vampiric Touch during an AoE pull.
Which is a casted spell, which I think is the other thing if you look at other specs, right? Of saying like having to sit there and hard cast VT over and over isn't the same as like a Balanced Druid, for example, or a Warlock just having it as an instant cast button, from a mobility perspective.
I'd say that's a relevant thing, but like probably not the biggest concern in terms of like how AoE actually plays out. I think the GCD investment is still much more important than the fact it's instant on cast or not.
Yeah, sure.
These concerns I actually haven't had. I tested it on PTR, and I did not actually have these issues.
I mean, I don't think they're issues per se. I think it's more that a toolkit feels incomplete if it doesn't have a mass AoE button like every other spec in the entire game does.
I actually think it's fine. Like,
Yeah.
the spec does not necessarily need one. It would be nice to have, but we don't necessarily need one with the 20 seconds from Shadow Crash. We can meet basically every single kind of damage type pattern now, unless for some reason the ads are spawning more frequently than 20 seconds. That is quite rare.
That is incredibly
sometimes,
rare. I don't think there's any
sometimes
case for that.
there's more monsters spawn than 8.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like that, in those cases, in Raid, those ads are normally not relevant. So yes, we can't pad fully, we can't hit every single monster, but our damage is so efficient currently that it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yes,
Now,
I think that's the thing. Shadow has traded like this ability to
In
handle
dungeons?
like large amounts of AoE for just this disgusting level of damage efficiency.
So now in dungeons as well, there isn't any issues with pulling over 8 mobs either that I've run into. On, for example, with the freehold pulls that go over 8 targets, you have time to just cast 3 or 4 vampiric touches, and that completely solves your rotational issues. Not only that, but you cast vampiric touches manually on the enemies that have the highest amount of HP, so those will be alive for the entire pull. So when you Shadow Crash, you're going to refresh on them. Potentially, depending on how many you've cast, it will refresh on those targets, and you will have dots on the big guys for longer than some of the small guys, which ends up fixing some of the issues that people have. You are going to throw probably 2 Shadow Crashes per pack. You'll throw one pull and 1 20 seconds in. You're not likely to throw a third. That's 40 seconds. At that point, the pack should be nearly dead. So as you approach that 40-second mark, sometimes some monsters will live longer than 40 seconds, especially in scrappy pug keys. That's understandable. However, if you have cast your expected 3 casts or whatever, 4 casts of pre-casted VT, and you've targeted them properly, you will have dots on those big enemies still. They will last for 10 seconds, and you will be fine. Now, if you have to manually refresh again, it's also fine. Manual refreshing isn't the end of the world, especially as the pack is dying. After every single monster is basically dead, and you're down to just 2 or 3 target cleave, manually casting a vampiric touch is not a massive damage loss.
Yeah,
you need your Shadow Crash for your next pull.
I agree with everything you've said with current tuning and with like how the dungeons are playing out currently. I also find that what you've said is pretty similar to my experience playing without Mindseer in live keys right now. Obviously, with a little bit less consistency on having Shadow Crash available for pulls, or being able to double crash in pulls and not gimp myself for the next pull. Usually that's okay.
Yeah, it's basically live, but you have more flexibility on Shadow Crash just because it has a lower cooldown.
And I mean, if you can play Seerless on live now, which you can, just not necessarily advised in
I just don't know like how much of the player base is gonna be in that same boat. Like I know it's possible.
I'd agree.
I know you can do it. It's doable. I'm just wondering like, is there or should there be a different answer here where it's like Shadow Crash 2 targets or Mental Decay working in AoE, right? Like right now we're not really prioritizing Mental Decay as a point, but if it at least worked in AoE, it could be the answer for some of those players or some of those situations, right?
Yeah, Mental Decay feels really out of place right now with the current state of Shadow in 10.1.
Yeah.
I think there's issues with Dark Solution in general now. I don't think it's got max value at all. Mental Decay
it's got none because Shadow Crash applies your dots.
However, I don't think that the weaker players, shall we say, are actually going to have that much of an issue. They may have some problems because you're going to have to Shadow Crash on pull. And my recommendation for that kind of player is you make a weak aura that will, like, say, for example, meow at you when Shadow Crash comes off cooldown. If you have slight cognitive like problems and you can't focus, make something that focuses for you. Make it remind you that you need to Shadow Crash, because the gameplay is easier to some degree. There is some complexity now on the rotation that wasn't there previously. However, if you just throw Shadow Crash and you do your single target rotation, you're going to do more damage now than you ever did before.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you just throw Shadow Crash and cooldown.
I'd tend to agree, yes. I'm more so just concerned about how overly reliant on the Vampiric Touch being active we are for doing any kind of AoE damage at all, regardless of how easy it is to apply. Crash is going into the ceiling, notwithstanding.
Z-axis problems, I don't know. That's where my thing is. Like, I do kind of wish you had a choice, maybe between, you could have the Shadow Crash style that we have currently with 10.1, or there was some alternative play style that you could do with Mental Decay working in AoE that actually didn't even require you to play like that, and you could, just cast dots
really,
manually and
I
refresh it with the spirits, right? Or whatever.
I think what we're all kind of hammering home at the moment is just like there seems to just be one way to play Shadow right now, regardless of whether it's single target or AoE.
Yeah.
That's fair. I think there could be more ways. I would have much preferred a multi-charge Shadow Crash. I think it would have been much healthier for the game, because I don't actually think that giving us permanent buffed-up time from a single spell was actually the correct decision, and I don't think that is actually healthy for the game, especially with how tight it is for some people.
I would absolutely agree.
Yeah, I mean, 30-second Shadow Crash, 2 charges, like the skill, I think the skill expression that you would get from that would be really fun to play with, I think.
Yeah, I would also agree with that too.
Especially now it's a 2-pointer talent. I don't know. It feels really lackluster for 2 points compared to what we have on live. So, okay, so I think where we landed with dot management, just to sum it up, it's fine right now, right? Like it's playable, it's passable. Could it be better? Obviously, I mean, a lot of things could be better, but like that's kind of where we're at. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say it's above average. Like I would say that there is nothing to be particularly concerned about with the design of it for most people. There is possibly issues with, like Right Shot in chat just mentioned, placing all of our damage behind a spell that is ground target may not be received by the casual player base. Yes.
Yeah.
Shadow Crash is return click. Shadow Crash is annoying to use. Shadow Crash has a travel time. Shadow Crash is slightly confusing. It hits lampposts. It hits trees. It hits everything. It's not great to have your damage
Shadow
crashing
up a hill. Shadow crashing up a hill is also, or up and down hills is also notoriously difficult.
Yeah, and I think there is kind of two problems here, right? Is that like we are very reliant on Shadow Crash, and at the same time, Mental Decay is super undervalued right now.
I don't see the point of it really at this point.
They could probably address both of those with a certain change. So hopefully there's enough time there, because I do think it's worth kind of seeing what they can do better in both cases. So.
Yeah, I think we also mentioned one thing about we mentioned that Shadow Crash has been split into 2 talents as well. There's a talent to make it a spell, and there's a talent to make it relevant. It feels like at this point.
Yeah, I don't know like why you would ever only take the first point in Shadow Crash, especially now that they've lowered its cooldown to 20 seconds, but then to compensate they nerfed its damage by 70%. So yeah, I don't know if there's ever a use case for just having that like 1 point in Shadow Crash, Feels like they were just trying to fill out our tree, but
yeah, there's kind of a theme across the entire talent tree, really, of taking a talent that we don't use away, then splitting a talent we do use in half and replacing the old talent with half of the current talent.
Yeah,
they've done it with Shadow Crash. Yeah. They've done it with Shadow Crash. They've done it with the third
Shadowy Insight.
Shadowy Insight, yes. Yeah. And it just generally doesn't feel good.
So let's talk about pathing then. I think that's probably the next big thing we want to bring up. I know Saeldur's talked a lot about this in the past. Let's kind of just start like top down about talent tree pathing in 10.1. So in the top section, Saeldur, what are your? I think in general nothing's really changed, right? Or if anything, it's gotten worse.
No, it's got worse. It's gotten way worse. Literally,
it's way worse.
So previously, you could be a hipster and not take mind searing keys, which let you have the either option of intangibility or mental fortitude. And just due to the relative benefits of playing the Mind Sailor's playstyle, which was, improved mobility and stuff like that, it ended up not being a DPS loss realistically in AoE to play the Mind Sailor's build because it gave you better flexibility on movement.
Sure.
That gave you effectively the ability to spec into a defensive for free. Now, how much damage you got or gain is here or there. It doesn't really matter anymore, and we're losing that anyway. But being able to access intangibility of mental fortitude in certain keys, especially at the 25 to 26 level where Ellipsis is at, is really big. Now, on the current tree, you can't do that. You have Thought Harvester, Psychic Link, and Surge of Insanity. All 3 of those are insane damage increases. Like and not only the insane damage increases, but the weakest one is probably Thought Harvester, which is the Mind Blast charge. But you can't drop it. The Shadow Crash is behind that. You need Shadow Crash for keys.
Yep.
So you're trapped. You have to take all 3, no matter what happens. And that means you just can't get a defensive upgrade without losing damage at the bottom of the tree. And due to how our tree layout ends up working at the bottom of the tree, we don't have spare points. We'll get to that in a bit. But that basically means we end up moving a node out the middle of the tree. It doesn't quite. Like, you can't really move a point. So, you're tight. You don't have
It's
points.
really,
It sucks.
like, it comes back to Blizzard's sort of refusal to put Shadow Priest's unique utility in the class section of the tree where utility is supposed to go, for fear of discipline and wholly getting hold of something that makes no thematic sense for them or is too powerful.
Yeah.
Which is strange, given that Blizzard have also made Retribution-specific changes in the Retribution class tree to allow them to get abilities that used to be in their spec tree.
I do think this is a relatively easy solve, though, right? Like, all they need to do is make Silencer Dispersion baseline. And if they do that...
Or Spirits.
Or Spirits, yeah. Just... Basically, pick one thing in this top section and make it baseline, and then you have that kind of quote-unquote free utility point.
You have one point of flexibility at that point, which can go into either Mental Fortitude Intangibility or Last Word Psychic Horror.
I mean, heck, having Psychic Link baseline. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but like pretty much, like it doesn't feel good to have the top of the tree be so full of mandatory points that you can't get because of pathing issues further on down the tree. I will say that the thematic links throughout the tree are at least vaguely more consistent at this point.
Yeah, so I think that's more in the bottom section, right?
Yeah, you don't feel like you're picking AoE to get single target and vice versa, mainly because everything does everything now, which is another kind of concern potentially for some people.
Okay, so let's talk about the middle section then, because I think this is probably where, in my opinion, we have the biggest issues. I don't know, it's hard. I guess I don't know. That's all kind of weird, but in the middle section, and I have it on stream as well, just kind of the image that I posted in the past, but we have quite a lot of these, quote, take all the time points now. And there's really not a whole lot of flexibility here. So, Saeldur, I don't know if there's like a particular thing you want to cover on the middle section. I know like there's a couple weirdness of like how they path into the bottom section that we think is weird. But yeah, anything that stands out to you?
There's some good news actually for the middle section of the tree. I changed the APL in the last couple of days and found something really interesting.
Okay.
Shadow Crash is no longer mandatory on single target.
Okay, that's interesting.
Oh, thank heavens.
You can now pass through Maddening Touch, and it's a slight DPS gain. Very slight. I don't know whether I broke the APL or what, but it is.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to look into it. It's a case that I did not expect to be a gain, but it ends up being a gain, so I'm going to have to look into it. Now, that's a problem in its own right, because Maddening Touch doesn't make much sense to be pathing into Mindbender.
For single target.
That was the original complaint. Yeah, for single target or anything, it's just...
Sure.
The talents of Mindbender and below are primarily single target focused. I mean, Inescapable Torment is AoE. It does keep.
Yeah.
However, we basically only use that on the single target currently, ignoring the tier set coming up and why we end up using it permanently. Mm-hmm. But Maddening Touch feeding into it doesn't make sense. Feels like it should just be a generic thing there, like Maddening. Dark Evangelism. It would still connect up to everything below it, and it would allow it for a generic connection that passed through to everything below it, and still have that same access.
You're saying to swap Maddening Touch with Dark Evangelism?
Yeah. It would give you a slightly different flexibility on things.
Yeah, I think it's also important though, just to reconcile, like, we don't really have like AoE talents and single target talents anymore, right? Like the spec just does single target everywhere now, right? So
funnily enough, Maddening Touch is one of the few we have left. So it's Phantasmal Pathogen on the right hand side. Those are one of the few flexes we ever change in our builds now. We swap Phantasmal Pathogen for Maddening Touch.
Yeah.
Because Maddening Touch, when you get some targets, outscales Phantasmal Pathogen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that's not quite the only issue in the middle section of the tree. The other issues is just how many points things like are required to get like Void Torrent, for example. Because we're going to want Void Torrent always. So Pub has it on his screen right now, where you can see he's got actually everything in the bottom right. He's got the talent Mind's Eye, and he's got Mind's Melt. However, like there's weirdness about this because it takes less points to travel from Dark Ascension down through Void Touch, Mind's Eye into Void Torrent than it does through Mind Spike.
Right.
However, if we assume that we always take Mind Spike, it is 2 points versus 2 points. But it's not quite a fair comparison either because you kind of always want Mind's Eye. It's just that good. It's a 5 insanity cost reduction, which is effectively a 10% insanity cost reduction, so 10% more devouring plagues.
Yeah, and I think what we were
that
seeing
basically means
Sims,
you take that node anyway.
Yeah, I think what we were seeing in like early talent sims was like Mind Melt was taken or Void Touched. It never liked both because of point efficiency. Because the 1 point into Void Torrent with Mind's Eye is just better than the 2 points with Mind Melt, right?
Yeah, I think Mind Melt being made into a 2-pointer is again like not kind of going back to the whole like taking things we had and then making them, stretching them out and making us pay more for them is like just not really worked out in this case.
Yeah, but a lot of this is, it's not really a playstyle choice, right? With any of this, it's just kind of filling out our tree with damage, right? Like it's not.
I mean, I kind of want to like draw this to the point, like a parallel with how the tree currently works on live and how it feels like it still works in 10.1. Despite Saeldur's recent potential discovery that Shadow Crash is not an ability that you're looking to be pressing on single target, which it probably will be anyway, given movement and various other things kind of factoring in there. Shadow's tree is kind of underpinned by the fact that you need to take every single active ability in every single build.
Yeah.
And so at that point, the tree becomes less about what build combinations you want, what kind of aspects of Shadow you want to build towards. It's more just, how do I efficiently get to the buttons, and then what do I have left?
True. And I think
which leads
to
a spec.
Like the tier set also isn't helping with that, right?
Yeah, it's not. But it's kind of because Blizzard has this like desire to active abilities in the talent tree are just always stronger than passives, pretty much. So the correct way to build the tree is just to pick every active spell and then work out what you have left.
Yeah. Okay, so before we get into like finishing out builds with the bottom section, I do want to cover the new talent that we got that's a choice note against Mind's Eye. It was brought up in chat. Distorted reality is a thing. Sailor, do you want to kind of cover how much fun that talent is?
Yeah, so I just said in chat, but this talent is always a damage loss. I don't know quite what they were intending, like whether it was to try and facilitate players that aren't quite as good as the class. Oh, sorry. Distorted reality, it reads, increases the damage of Devouring Plague by 20%, but Devouring Plague deals its damage over 12 seconds and its insanity cost is increased by 25. So it costs 50% more insanity, but it only deals 20% more damage. So you have lost damage or insanity.
So the value they're assuming you're supposed to get is from uptime, but Devouring Plague's uptime was already pretty much 90%. When you were playing,
it is 90%. Yep, it is 93% potentially using on your tier sets.
Yeah. So the uptime isn't really giving you anything. Now maybe it's like, I think maybe a 2-target thing, like were they trying to make it so you could have it maintained better in multi-target?
Not really a thing.
Yeah, it's real bad.
It feels like a miss. It feels like just a swing and a miss, honestly.
And I think like playing with it doesn't feel better either. Like it.
No.
Like it feels like it should give you more uptime, but it doesn't.
It doesn't even have PvP use either, because like
it's bad in PvP.
It makes your damage more spread out and easier to dispel.
You just get dispelled if you press that in PvP.
Yeah, exactly.
Too much damage is spread out.
It's just really badly designed. I'm not sure what the alternative design would be if you wanted a talent to be competitive against Mind's Eye.
75.
The same thing, but damage neutral.
Is so much. Yeah. I don't know.
Like, if you just made that talent damage neutral, that would be competitive versus Mind's Eye. It would have to just be damage neutral. That's it.
Which I think that's probably what they were going for, because they've been doing this in some of the other reworks as well. Like, I think like Ret Paladin has one that makes their holy power like 4. The spenders are now 4 holy power worth instead of 3. Like, it feels like they're trying to give more things to slow the spec down if people want to. But it feels like this is too much of a damage loss for that goal. I don't know. Maybe that's what they were thinking, but
I'm not sure really. That it just feels very out of place.
Yeah,
it's weird.
Anything else in the middle section here? And again, this is just off of really early data. I'm sure we'll tweak things as we go.
Can we pour one out for Mind Devourer?
It is a sad note that we never take.
Well, that being said, though, we're not, and we can maybe segue a little bit to the tier set. So the tier set that we're getting right now in tier 30 is your Shadowy Insight procs deal 60% more damage and give you 4 extra insanity. That's our 2 set. And then the 4 set, every 400 insanity you spend spawns a Bender or Shadow Fiend, depending on what you have talented. What we're not sure of, because that tier set is not testable right now on PTR, is how it counts spending Insanity for the 4 set, because it's possible that Mind Devourer like does count as spending Insanity, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Which would definitely help
Yeah.
it. But yeah, it's really bad without that.
But yeah, going from 20% to 8% is really very painful.
But Pub, even if it did count, it's only worth an extra 3.6 Insanity on average to a Mind Blast.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah,
very much.
It's
Yeah.
nothing.
It used to be 10.
Yeah, well, I mean, they did move it up, though, as well, so it's not competing with stuff in the kind of bottom section, and
Sure.
all of these points in the middle section are kind of like, what's their, like, average per point, would you say? Is it, like, 1.5%, 2% per point?
Around 2%.
Around 2%, okay.
1.8, 2%.
Okay.
I mean, if you count the average for the middle section, it's more like 6, but that's not the point. If you count those nodes that are all 2 out of 2, they're like 1.8.
Okay. So, yeah, just
1.7.
feels lackluster. Yeah, and I don't, yeah. And before it was kind of like a playstyle thing as well, like with Mindseer especially, like you just got so much value out of it. But now they've killed the proc rate, and Mindseer obviously isn't a thing anymore, so it feels like they kind of double nerfed it.
I mean,
If it had the other numbers, it'd be
especially
fine.
alongside the SI nerf as well, like,
Yeah.
which I guess we can
But-
talk about when we talk about the 2-set bonus.
This node is now worse for 2 points than it used to be, like, for 1 point.
Mm.
Like, that's how bad it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's.
And before, it wasn't even that good. Like, it actually wasn't even that good on single target.
Yeah.
We just had to take it to get Yogg.
So you're right. Yeah. So still quite a lot. I mean, like the middle section has just, I don't know. It needs some help. It needs some clarity. I think pathing for sure is one thing, but I think like node power as well could be improved, because we effectively have more or less 3 dead nodes in PvE: Unfurling Darkness, Mental Decay, and Mind Devourer. And the Devouring Plague.
Melt, technically, too. And started.
And Maddening Touch is not actually that good, and getting to Mindbender just feels bad right now, I guess, in single target.
Oh, let's talk about that, because I think.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I moved the wrong thing. So the tier set, and again, I'm going to cover Ellipsis a bit, but that's okay. The bottom section of the tree has potential. I think they've fixed a lot of the pathing here, right? So I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, because I think in general the pathing in the bottom section feels better in 10.1 than it does currently on live.
Yes,
It feels way better.
the idols feel like they make sense going into each other now, at least a little bit.
Yeah, so bottom left section is still the same, like Bender going into Yashiraj makes sense, right?
Yup.
N'Zoth was moved to the second position. The cool thing about them moving N'Zoth is they connected Screams to N'Zoth, so you can always have Screams and N'Zoth together, which is a combo we've been asking for a while.
Yeah, like
So
make my
good.
make my dots tick faster so that I can get more N'Zoth ticks.
Yeah,
like,
it's
it
great.
makes sense. Yeah.
Auspicious Spirits was broken out from Tormented Spirits, so now you get both of those by pathing into Yogg Saron. Makes sense. Cool. I mean, on paper.
Feels really good.
Feels good. And then the bottom right section, they didn't move Void Torrent, Malediction, or Insidious Ire, but they made all of those guys work together, and that Void Torrent now works with Insidious Ire, and Void Torrent now also can proc Cthulhu, which is good. Makes sense.
It makes Void Torrent feel thematically more like a big Mind Flay,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
I think
which is kind of what we always wanted, really.
the only thing that really feels out of place for me is the new node Mastermind, which is right to the left of N'Zoth.
Mastermind feels like a point for point's sake because they removed Whispers and had to put something else in the tree, is how it feels to me.
Yeah, it just
It's
doesn't really
something
have
with-
anything
it's
to
something
do
that-
with N'Zoth,
yeah.
right? Like, it's just, that's the only one that feels...
It doesn't really have anything to do with anything. It's just a
Yeah.
flat damage increase to spells.
I personally would like them to just remove Mastermind. I feel like if they put Screams where Mastermind is, they could put a node to the left of Tormented Spirits that does more single target than Tormented Spirits does, and then feeds into
Connected to
Yogg-Saron.
Yogg.
So you can go Auspicious Spirits, you can take a single target spirit node that you can take Yogg, or you can go through Tormented Spirits and Keys and get Yogg.
Yeah,
Or you
And
could just
that
make,
would be
or you could
better?
just make Auto Spirits could just be a choice node again with something else.
That works too. It's just more like to make the 3 nodes have the same number of points.
Yeah, I know.
But and also that means you would also have options to take both if you wanted to have the AoE spirit and the single target spirit node for some reason. But
Yes.
yes, Mastermind is crap.
But that's
Yes.
so that's on paper. The last section looks better. In practice, however, with all the changes they made recently to effectively they buffed Shadow or Death pretty heavily, right? Like not only baseline did Death get better, but now breaking out the Surge of Insanity or Mind Flay Insanity guy, moving up to the top section of our tree, has freed up Death Speaker to be relevant, and then they buff Death Speaker. So that, paired with the tier set revolving around Mindbender, is now heavily locking us into the bottom left section of the tree.
Yes.
Which kind of means the talent tree is kind of figured out.
There's no options at this point. You can't do anything else.
It's even worse than that, Pug, because we require all 4 of the top talents.
Yep.
They're all too good. We need all 4, because Void Torrent's too good, or Specialist too good. Death Speaker, like you said, has now been buffed. It's too good. And Mindbender is too good. You need all 4.
Yep.
So what choice do you have now for talents? Right? Do you want to take this one, Pug? Do you want to fill in the tree for everyone in chat? Luke, do you want to show off why it's bad?
Yeah, so in the image on stream is kind of showing that. So the green nodes are what you always take. And again, that's partially because, okay, let's say you don't take Void Torrent and Auspicious Spirits. Where would you put those points? Like, this is kind of the issue, is that, like, things on row 9 aren't that strong. Row 8 is just so powerful that, yeah, we're going to pick all of them if you can. So you take all of those guys. You take Yashiraj always. This is single target, 2 target, 4 target, dungeons, everywhere. You're taking all of these points. And then the choice comes in. Okay, do you want Yashiraj and Cthulhu or Yashiraj and N'Zoth? Generally speaking, Cthulhu is just going to be the go-to again. With all the other changes that they've made, pathing into Insidious Ire and then Cthulhu is going to be the choice for, like, I don't know, 90% of scenarios, I think. Maybe some flexibility with Malediction if you really want to, like, time up cooldown timings with something. Like, that's a flex, maybe. And then going Screams N'Zoth, potentially for certain AoE situations. But that's it, pretty much.
That's it.
Like,
I would have liked to play Yogg.
Yeah, Yogg is just so underperforming right now. We even did some experiments earlier on with, like, okay, what if we gave the build more crit to get more value out of, like, Tormented Spirits and stuff? And it was just, yeah, it didn't work.
It's not worth it.
Wasn't worth it, yeah.
Yeah.
The problem is the requirement of your charge, though. If we didn't need your charge, we could actually play Yogg and N'Zoth. That was a valid build that we had in the lines for AoE, and even dungeons to some extent. It wasn't going to be the top build because it just lost a bit too much single target, but it didn't lose that much single target, all things considered. It was surprisingly efficient because of the combination of Screams and Tormented Spirits at the same time. Was really nice, and it played really well. It's just we need Idleness of Charge always because our tier set forces us to take it.
The other thing that this does kill, which was kind of probably a meme anyway, with the new tree, it was actually possible to get N'Zoth, Yogg-Saron, and Cthulhu all in one build.
That felt like an oversight from the moment we saw it, but it was very funny.
But to be fair,
good.
when you did that, you gave up Mindbender, you gave up Death Speaker, and you gave up Void Torrent to get that. So
That's a fair trade.
You're giving up quite a lot, but you get the triple idol.
Like
so
the bottom of Shadow's tree has 8 capstones. Effectively, it has 4 at the top and 4 at the bottom.
Yeah.
That's how powerful things are.
Once the top are better.
Exactly. Yes, which also means that when you've got a tree that feels like this, going back to what we said about the poor design of the top of the tree, nothing in the bottom of the tree can be given up. The only talents you could ever give up is 1 out of 2 Ire and 1 out of 2 Torment, and you can't do that because you need to get to the idols.
Yeah.
You can't give up Void Torrent, you can't give up Auspicious Spirits, you can't give up Death Speaker, you can't give up Mindbender, you can't give up your charge, and you can't give up Cthulhu.
Yeah.
So the whole tree is just locked in at that point. Yeah.
So from a build diversity perspective,
there isn't any.
It's safe to say it is much worse in 10.1. And this is kind of even if they change the tier set, I want to be really clear. Even if they change the 4 set to not interact with Bender at all, this is actually probably still what we're going to play. The tier set just doubles down on it even more, is kind of what we were saying.
Yeah.
So
the death changes were already enough, basically, to buff Inescapable Torment out of the grave. It was kind of dead-ish, but then they buffed death to the moon.
That's possible. The tier set could be changed to something that would make it more balanceable. And that's kind of what we were saying. Like if the tier set was around Shadowy Apparitions, that could actually be enough to make Yogg more competitive and thus give us more build diversity. But
I think another factor is that Blizzard's kind of ethos towards the rework was to increase build diversity,
Right.
which felt really strange given the build diversity on live was massive to the point where people were arguing about what they were supposed to be playing.
Yeah, there was, I mean,
Well,
there's like what, 8 viable builds and keys if you talk about combinations of Dark Ascension, Void Eruption, all of the idols, and then Mindseer or no Mindseer. Like that's pretty good.
yeah, I don't tend to like saying which cooldown you pick is a build
Well,
per se,
sure.
but like there's a lot more variety in current gameplay than there is ever going to be with the new talent tree.
Well, I think it's really hard because it's like the new tree it has been solving some of these problems, but I think it's, you know, getting build diversity is a really, like, that's a really healthy mix of the design and the tuning kind of working together. So there's still time
Yes.
to fix it for sure.
For
So
example, on live we have builds that don't run Mindbender. We have builds that run every single combination of idols
yeah,
has a viable build.
pretty much.
Like you can run the Zoth Yogg, you can run Cthulhu Yogg, you can run Yashaj Cthulhu in single target if you're really, really certain that you don't have to move. You can run Yashaj Yogg if you are doing single target, and you can run Yashaj N'Zoth if you're doing keys and a little bit mad.
Well, yeah. And like in the same thing too, like Dark Ascension and Void Eruption as well on live are kind of, they're very equal, I think is fair to say. Like you can
Yes.
kind of run either in almost any form of content. You just it changes how you play a little bit with like being a 1 minute spec versus a hard 2 minute spec.
Yeah.
10.1 not so much.
Yeah, 10.1 Voidform is like kind of dead. Pretty
Not
much.
kinda. It's just dead.
Yeah,
Like,
let's
it's just
The
outright
VA
dead.
is just too much better.
Yeah, let's clarify that. I think this is really important. So, because people are like, wait, we don't play Voidform in 10.1?
Yeah, Voidform is dead in next patch.
So they didn't
Completely
actually
dead.
nerf Voidform directly, but because of all the other changes around it, Voidform is now considerably worse. So
Shadow.
let's all change, right?
yeah.
So one,
Yeah.
our AOE is now our single target, right? To do AOE, we do single target. So what that means is the component of Voidform that gave us the mastery bonus, that was really great for Mindseer, because Mindseer was hitting targets that did not have all of our dots on it. But with the way Psychic Link works, that value is now very, very largely diminished. It doesn't really
Yes.
give us anything. It's kind of like you're playing it on single target. So that got hit. Second thing that got hit was Void Bolt in a couple different ways. So with Shadow Crash being a 20-second cooldown now, the value of getting that dot extension from Void Bolt is
gone.
gone.
Yep.
So that also hurt it. And then the other
Yogg.
thing was the buffs to Mind Spike and Mind Spike Insanity and Shadow Word Death.
And Death Speaker.
All of that
like,
direct damage is now getting buffed by Dark Ascension.
Yes.
Also,
and
you
all of
missed
that-
one thing.
and
You
that's all
can't
going
take
in
Yogg
Psychic-
anymore.
Yeah, and that's all going to Psychic Link. And yes, we can't take Yogg anymore, so the increased spirits from having Void Bolt in the rotation aren't relevant.
Sure, yeah. So, and again, for those that didn't know, so Void Form, the tooltip reads that it gives you 10% damage, but that 10% damage is actually just replacing Shadow Form's 10% damage. So by pressing Void Form right now, all you're getting is basically just the damage from Void Bolt.
Yes.
It's not really compared to Dark Ascension, which is just giving you 25% more damage on all your stuff,
Yes.
basically.
Another thing is Dark Ascension is 1 minute cooldown, Void of Eruption is 2. Ancient Madness provides the same crit bonus for both talents. It's not doubled for Void Eruption because it has a double cooldown. It's the same crit.
Yeah.
Therefore, that talent combination, which you always take, is just better with Dark Ascension.
Yeah, I mean that's been the case for a while though, and even like
It has been the case for a while, but it further nails in why DA is better than Void
yes,
Eruption.
it does.
It
does.
just has more synergy now.
I think-
than Void Form.
Yes. It feels very strange that the rework that's focus was build diversity has just homogenized the entire tree.
Yeah, and again, part of that is like with the tier side a little bit, but yeah, I do. But I think it's worth asking the question now, especially if we're in this kind of rework mode. Why do we have Dark Ascension and Void Eruption? Like, what's actually the answer? When we first got it, they were
Thematic difference.
saying like
Thematic difference.
build your own Shadow Priest, and kind of saying like you want to play Mind Spike Dark Ascension or Mind Flay Void Form, which like in theory is kind of a neat idea, but I feel like in practice you're just not getting enough playstyle or identity with these cooldowns to make them warrant being a choice, you know? It's just a math thing.
Yeah, in practice, the answer ended up being both at once, which was not their intention at all.
The other thing about Void Eruption is you said Mind Flay versus Mind Spike, but Void Eruption wants Mind Spike, not Mind Flay as well, because it doesn't have the space to press Mind Flays in. Void Bolt takes up most of the rotation, and it's worth pressing. It does a lot of damage. It doesn't make like a lot of insanity. It's a good button. It's just not good enough to make up for the fact that it has a longer cooldown.
Yeah, you can't.
Ascension synergizes perfectly. Void Eruption does not.
Yep, you can't fit Void Bolt and MFI in the same rotation, really.
Well, it's hard. Like how do you build a tree with two different cooldowns as a choice and make their identities feel unique enough? It's a really hard thing to like. I honestly don't know how possible that is unless the cooldowns are like what they are today, which are kind of irrelevant to your playstyle for a lot of things.
Yeah, Blizzard really needs to like work out what they want Voidform and Dark Ascension to do and what they want them to both be good at.
Right.
Because right now they exist. They feel like they exist more to placate thematic concerns, and just happen to be mechanically different as well, but not enough that they do anything different.
If it's just thematics, then make Voidform the cooldown, and just give us a glyph that makes Voidform look like Dark Ascension.
The problem then is you still have Void Bolt as a button that people don't want.
Well, that's fair. And the other suggestion is, like, again, give them some more identity, give each one their own kind of thing. Like, Dark Ascension, when you press Dark Ascension, your Mind Flay transforms to Mind Spike, that kind of thing. Or Voidform, I think, needs a damage amplification, maybe some kind of ramping effect being added. Give these cooldowns some more identity. Or, honestly, I think I'd rather just go back to having just Voidform again. They could still have a choice node. They could be like, here's 1 minute Voidform that doesn't last as long and doesn't have Void Bolt, or here's 2 minute Voidform that has all of that. Could do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like 1 minute Voidform that doesn't have the extension mechanic, 2 minute Voidform that has the extension mechanic and extra knobs,
Yeah, I mean, they could do something like that. Because I think the modifiers and kind of where you pick one, they need some.
I do feel like I have to stand up for Dark Ascension here a little bit.
Sure.
Given it's something I've played a lot with in versions of the spec that are pretty much ancient history at this point.
Yeah.
The punchiness of your direct damage spells when you're using a cooldown that's able to buff them by that much because it only buffs direct damage spells feels really good. Like Shadow of Death being able to hit like 190k crits, like even Mind Spike crits or Mind Blast hits on live during all your CDs when they are psychic linking to targets and being buffed by Insidious Ire feels really good.
Maybe I'd feel better if it was instant cast again. That's.
Yeah, I mean, I genuinely do not understand what warrants a cast time on Dark Ascension. I have no idea.
Well, they gave it the Insanity, but I think I'd prefer.
But that warrants it. That warrants it being on the global because that's how Moonkin's cooldown used to work before they removed the global from it and removed the Astral Power generation from it.
Yeah.
That warrants it being on the global. That does not warrant it having a cast time, not in the slightest.
So Pub, hear me out. I don't care which one they pick, but I'd like them to pick one and then make it designed around it. I feel like they can add a lot more flavor if they just pick one.
And I think that's the same thing with Psychic Link,
They're both cool.
We said the same thing about our AoE playstyle. On live right now, there's like 5 different ways of doing AoE, and we were like, can we just have like one thing that's like, okay, Shadow Priest, this is how you AoE. Like here's your answer. We're gonna make your builds and your talents revolve around that. And they did that.
Then you can,
and then you can Psychic Link now, right?
Yes. I think that the thing is, though, in doing that, they also kind of forgot to give us multiple different ways to interact with Psychic Link. We just have one.
Okay, sure. But I think like it gives us at least some centering point for feedback of saying like
the spec. Yeah.
Like it's easier to come up with things and to give feedback when you only have to consider like, yep, here's how it needs to work with that AoE playstyle. And I think what Saeldur and I were kind of saying was like, can we do that same thing with our cooldowns of saying, yeah, this is Shadow's cooldown again. Here's how it works. Here's the identity of it. You can change talents around it to make it fit more, or to expand on it, or to change its playstyle. But I think right now it's harder to do with having 2 different CDs with
I
lack
would
of
absolutely
identity.
agree with that.
So
I personally feel like we've maybe lost a bit when we took the Psychic Link hit. We did lose a bit by not having the option to have the mindset. Like, all those
For
5,
sure we
6
did,
builds you
yeah.
mentioned were contributing to our build diversity.
Yeah.
But personally, for me, I would like them to pick a single direction like they have with Psychic Link for the cooldowns as well. Take that in one direction, so narrow down Shadow's focus. Even if we lose build diversity like we clearly are here, narrow it down to a point. And then, like, iron out the kinks of the spec
yeah.
and make us good. Like, make the spec properly finished and, like, put some actual iteration time in, and then after that, as we approach 10.2, 10.3, and beyond, we can then like widen it out again. We can add more flexibility back into the tree after we've worked out how to make a coherent build around what it has.
Yeah.
If we ended up all being Psychic Links, Dark Ascension, and it all just ironed out the kinks and everything worked together, I think then we can add on to that way easier than we can try to homogenize and combine things together and make them just kind of work, but not really. I think it would just be a much easier direction to take.
I tend to agree. It feels like the build your own Shadow Priest experiment is kind of coming apart at the seams.
Well, I don't know if I'd say that. I think what I'd actually say is it feels like it was never fully finished or realized.
Yeah.
You know, like,
but I mean, like,
it's possible. They can do it.
It was poorly put together and it's falling apart.
It's a lot of work to do that.
It is. It's an enormous amount of work, and it's why I don't think the build your own Shadow Priest was a particularly good direction to go, because it's a direction that isn't a direction. You're just trying to.
It's very ambitious. Is the problem?
To placate everybody.
I actually kind of liked the build your own Shadow Priest idea,
Yeah.
but my problem I think was that we had a developer change during the very, very last couple of weeks of the beta cycle. We had a developer change, and therefore we had to have a new developer in the middle of COVID pandemic pick up our spec and try to learn how to make a tree from it. And they were given build your own Shadow Priest as like what they were told to make, and I don't think that's very fair. I don't think that's fair at all.
I do think that the amount of the task given to them was Herculean and damn near impossible, and I still commend every effort to get to the point where we are now, because I will be honest, I find Shadow immensely fun in 10.0 point whatever it is now. I find the spec immensely fun right now. I understand that it is overly complicated, verbose, difficult to understand for new players, unnecessarily unintuitive, and arguably too diverse in terms of playstyles for Mythic Plus and everything like that. But I find the buttons I'm pressing, what they do, and how they interact with each other immensely fun.
Yeah, it's got a lot of redeeming qualities for sure. So I think it's just kind of a case of like where do they want to go, and it's so hard because like the community of Shadow Priest is full of very passionate people, right? And the hard part, you ask.
I feel like Blizzard would do better just ignoring us.
Well, like pick 10 Shadow Priests, right, that have played Shadow within the last 5 expansions. Every single one of them will pick a different patch where they thought it was the most fun. It's like there's very little agreement across everyone of saying like, yeah, this is how we want to play, just because the thing's been reworked so many times. People have like fallen in love with different versions in Raid or Mythic Plus or whatever. So it's a really hard problem, and I think that's where I think the build your own Shadow Priest as an idea was kind of interesting, because it's like, well, if they can pull it off, maybe you can do it.
It's just you're biting off a lot there, and it's if you can. You're biting off a lot, and it's if you can actually like have the development time and kind of the vision to see it through to a completion. And I don't necessarily begrudge anybody for finding that to be a failure or anything, but like that's a really, really, really hard thing to do. And at the end of the day, the fact they got something that I find this enjoyable, I'm already kind of thoroughly impressed with.
Yeah.
I'm just concerned for the future with how build your own Shadow Priest is supposed to pan out long term.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we've been chatting for a bit. Let's kind of cover, is there anything kind of like last topics you guys wanted to cover, or last things you wanted to say before we move on to questions? And we'll take questions in chat if people want to start throwing them in there. But I'll go to Saeldur first here. Anything else you kind of wanted to bring up or mention just real quick before we go to questions?
I mean, TSA actually kind of like very briefly. We flamed it earlier, but I like the 400 insanity spend thing. I like that part of the TSA.
I despise it.
I like having something that feeds back to us pressing spenders.
I
don't necessarily like that it's 400 insanity, maybe, but I like being rewarded for pressing my spender and not my builder. That's just personal preference, I think.
Yes. At a very basic level, I am pleased that I have a tier set that cares about me pressing Devouring Plague. I am very unhappy that the way it cares about it is by being a carbon copy of Arcane Pulsar.
Oh, that's fair enough.
Well, they could also. Are you
Um,
saying, Sailor, that you like the 400 insanity, but like, what about the pet part? Are you saying maybe they changed that
I
bit?
don't like the pet part.
Okay, you like the 400
I mean,
insanity, but like the after effect of like spawning a bender. That's yeah,
yeah, I like
Yeah.
caring about pressing the Devouring Plague.
yeah.
It necessarily doesn't have to be the 400 insanity. It could just be do Devouring Plague, get X. But
Sure.
it's just, I like pressing Devouring Plague and getting something for it because if everyone remembers back to the the 9.0 tier set that just, is it 9.1 or whatever tier set, that buffed, the first version that just buffed Mind Blast too much. And Devouring Plague was basically bad.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's my concerns with
I think-
overly buffing filler spells.
Yeah, overly buffing filler spells. Also for a spec like Shadow, which has this weird like filler and cooldown filler spells, like you have to be very careful about how much damage everything is doing. Like I think the way things are split on live right now, where Devouring Plague ends up shaking out to be about 25 to 30% of your damage in single target, is about where we want to be.
It's pretty healthy.
honestly.
Yeah. I think we're
And
a
I
little
think
lower than
buffing-
that on 10.1, right? Are we at like 22?
Yeah, we're a
25?
little lower than that in 10.1, but like, it's
I
not
can check.
horrendously low.
Yeah.
But,
Let me
like,
find a tab.
That's mainly because Mind Spike Insanity gets buffed so much.
True. Yeah, that doesn't help.
But like I
22.2.
Okay. That's
yeah,
fine.
okay, so maybe a little bit lower than I'd like, but like in that kind of
It's fine.
ballpark of 20 to 30. I probably
It's
prefer it
mostly-
much nearer
yeah.
30, but yes, that's kind of the point. I really dislike that we are doing Mindbender based things for the
Fifth tier, fourth tier.
8th patch in like since
yeah.
Legion began.
Yeah, I
Possibly.
think people are gonna get a little tired,
And exhausted
exhausted
by this at this
of
point.
playing Inescapable Torment Bender playstyles for the 4th or 5th tier in a row. Yeah, that's
Yeah, it's just too much. Like I guess
Yeah.
half of Castle Nathria I will give as us not playing Mindbender, and I guess the single legendary with Covenant legendary part of SOD was like not Mindbender-ish, but you could still play it, and it was still a very valid option for like some builds, and obviously not everyone was a Necrolord.
yeah.
And then we've been playing Mindbender otherwise that since Nighthold.
Mm-hmm.
Like I am again, it kind of comes back to the whole your single target talent build contains every active spell in your tree.
Yeah.
Mindbender is always going to be part of the talent build because it's an active spell in the Shadow talent tree, and it doesn't have a alternative. You will always pick it because it's always just better to path the tree through active spells.
All right, so
Not only that, but
we bullied the tier
Oh,
set,
sorry.
I think, quite a bit. But
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I can keep bullying the 2 set if you
Yeah,
like, because
I know.
the change they made to Shadowy Insight to make
Oh,
it work.
Oh yeah, we
Yeah,
didn't say that.
yeah, this change is like it looks very small, but it just feels so bad. Because the way Shadowy Insight works on live is that when you get a proc, you get an extra Mind Blast.
Yep.
And you get like an extra literal physical Mind Blast. It like your charges go up, even if you were at max charges, you go to 3.
You get plus
and
1
you
charge.
get that Mind Blast.
Yeah.
Yes, you get plus 1 charge. And the way that kind of shakes out, it means that no matter where the cooldown of your Mind Blast was, you are always getting exactly 1 Mind Blast's worth of value from your SI. Even if your Mind Blast was like just about to come off cooldown, even if you'd only just put it on cooldown, like you always got 1. Which is how SI worked, but basically no other procs in the game really worked like that. Every other proc was like, oh, it just resets the cooldown back. So if you get the proc when you have like 0.2 seconds left on your cooldown, you only save 0.2 seconds of damage.
Or if you
really,
get it mid
I guess.
cast of the spell.
Or if you get it mid cast on the spell, you get to fire 2 off back to back, and it feels really good.
Yeah.
But like, why not just make that how it always feels? So the change to SI, reverting it back to how it used to work, as like it refreshes the cooldown, is really bad. And then having a tier set that accentuates that badness, it just feels awful, honestly. And it kind of makes me disappointed for other specs, because the technology of a proc that gives you a full charge of a spell felt so much more fluid and interesting that I wanted other specs to gain that as the class team got more familiar with things and as specs developed. Like I felt
Sure.
like Ret Paladin was a primary candidate for this with the Blade of Justice proc, which I don't know if they still have after the rework in 1007.
Hey, no Ret Paladins in this podcast. That's illegal. You can't do
Sorry,
that.
but
No.
yes, but the point is like there were other specs that could have thoroughly benefited from that kind of design,
Sure.
and seeing it go away from Shadow, and I guess it's come back in part with Death Speaker, but not really to the same like level of flexibility.
It's really nice though. It feels
It
so
is really
nice.
nice, but like
Yeah.
seeing it go away from SI makes me feel disappointed that it's not a direction Blizzard wants to be going in at all.
Yeah, I mean, we gave that feedback. Hopefully they listen. I know they were trying to reduce the amount of instant cast that the spec had. Maybe that was part of it, but yeah,
I feel like that's the wrong way to go about that,
I agree.
honestly.
All right, any other final points? We have some questions we can start covering otherwise.
Nothing specific on my end, actually. I don't think.
All right, here's one we didn't
I
cover.
guess Mind Melt no longer makes Mind Blast instant after 2 charges, which is annoying. Mind Melt is now just like a strict buff to crit chance of Mind Blast, which is
Again, they were
really,
trying to
really
reduce
weak.
instant cast.
Yeah, but it's also just really weak, especially because it costs 2 points.
Yeah, that's fair. Making it a 2-pointer was struggling for sure. But I do actually agree removing the instant cast because it did just encroach on the design of Shadowy Insight.
I'd agree. I
Which
think that would have
didn't
been more than enough. I don't think they had to
Make
nerf
it a
Shadowy
2-pointer.
Insight and remove the sort of technical
Yeah,
marvel that they'd done to create it in the first place.
I agree.
Oh, I just thought of one other quick complaint. With the death changes, and especially the idol coming up that does damage to us, if you don't have baseline leech on your gear, you will actually kill yourself and execute. Even with Tide Evasion.
That's a really big problem, actually. Shadow of Death is just like doing too much damage back to us at this point.
Okay, add some leech,
Like
everybody.
maybe to increase the little value of Tide Evasion by a tiny bit to like 85, because we're starting like as we gain more and more like stats, it does more damage compared to our health. It grows faster than our HP does, and the damage it then reflects back to us is increased.
Do you remember
and,
what the damage
it
taken
hurts.
per second was? It was like 2 or 3k average, right?
Yeah, 2 or 3k average. On PTR, on my live character, I was testing on the dummies. I was taking around 4,000 damage per second with the idol on and pressing deaths on an execute dummy. About 4,000. I was out healing it passively through leech.
So 4,000
Yes.
damage taken per second and
I have-
execute, and like 2,000
I have 5% leech. I have 5%
Yeah,
leech. So
that's not something most people are going to have access to. Like, that's not...
We'll drop your avoidance and chance, and now you play leech. You're a healer.
yeah.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't feel good. I do like the flavor of Shadow of Death backlash damage, but when it starts encroaching on gameplay, I feel like we've kind of gone a little bit too far.
Yeah, the knob needs to. I mean, Tide Evasion is the knob. They can tune that, right? Hopefully.
Yes.
But yeah.
Like, so currently it's 75%. It probably needs to be 85 at this point.
Yep.
But also, I just I don't really like the fact that we have to pick a talent to make Shadow of... Like, there are now 3 talents on Shadow of Death. There is Shadow of Death, there is Death and Madness, and there is Tide Evasion. You need all 3.
In the class tree, yeah. Yeah. All right. Speaking of the class tree, someone asked, why does Mindgames still exist? How do we feel about Mindgames? Anyone want to take that?
How do I feel about Mind Games? In PvP, it's great.
Okay.
I think it's a really cool ability that does a good job. I think in PvE, it's kind of just like a better Mind Blast, and the role of button on a 30 to 45 second cooldown that feels good to press and does big dam is already being fulfilled by Void Torrent.
Sure.
We just continue to have that problem of pick every active damage button in your tree because it's better than every passive. So you end up with Mindbender, Shadow Crash, Void Torrent, Mind Games, and Halo/Divine Star. And I think that's just too many button for the sake of button press on cooldown abilities. In single target, I would like to ditch Mind Games and Shadow Crash and just focus on Void Torrent, Halo being a big healing utility cooldown every 45 seconds or so.
Which it is now,
and
more or less.
Mindbender? Yeah, and Mindbender. And have Shadow Crash be a spell that I genuinely want because I want to do AoE, and give me compelling options to put points in that aren't that, so that I can kind of buff my single target up if I don't want to take that spell.
My other complaint about Mind Games is it's 4 points. And
Yes.
the last 3 are effectively nothing, but you kind of need to take them all anyway because it's damage and it's damage in the class tree, so it's free.
Yeah,
Yes,
I know Disc
exactly.
wouldn't like it, but I personally would rather. I would like to see the removal of Mind Games doing raw damage, and just make it a
I'm
utility thing.
I'm not really sure what to do with mind games. I feel like it's more of like a symptom of the design of the class and spec trees as a whole. Blizzard are also more than capable, as we've now seen with Paladins, of making the class trees genuinely different from spec to spec.
Yeah.
It's something they've done now. They've put extra nodes in the Rep Paladin class tree, just straight up. So we know it's something they're capable of.
Yeah, I don't know. I still think there are nice use cases for mind games that I do enjoy pressing, like specifically in PvE actually, for like
I like
a
pressing it.
mini
I
tank
like pressing
defensive.
it. Yeah, I like pressing it on the ad before the last boss of Court of Stars when it does its leech heal because it
Yep,
does damage to
it
itself.
feels really good.
That's fun.
Yeah, or like
Yeah,
Halls
that's
of
fun.
Valor, Herja, the tank
Halls of Valor also
thing.
the soldier mobs because they heal themselves.
Yeah, like I think like those kinds of interactions I really enjoy. Now you could argue like, is it worth the button just for those interactions? Or like,
Probably
oh,
not.
Temple Third Boss, that's another good example. Like the Tank Buster there, it's like massive
Yeah, like
value.
it's not massive value. It's like it's okay healing at that point. Like,
I
I
it's
guess
pretty
my
good.
perspective is 25 to 26 is where like that's a drop in the ocean. They're gonna die anyway if they didn't press a wall.
Well, okay, that's fair. But I think like those use cases I enjoy. Pressing it on cooldown I enjoy less. So I'm just
Yeah,
wondering like if they want to keep it for PvE, I would rather them accentuate the utility
I
aspect
think
of it rather than like pressing it for
yeah.
damage aspect.
I think if we're in a situation where we're no longer taking Shadow Crash on single target
Mm-hmm.
and Halo slash Divine Star or whatever is like massively buffed in healing and made neutral in damage to the point where we're not pressing it on CD and we're not like thinking about it that way,
Yeah.
I think I'm pretty happy with pressing Mind Games and Void Torrent. Mindbender on top of that, and kind of the spec being the sort of like 1 minute long, 1 minute like script rotation where you just have so many abilities coming off CD at roughly the same time that it feels like you're not really playing Shadow anymore. You're just kind of pressing buttons one after the other.
Yeah.
Is not ideal, but Mind Games is a cool spell, and I wouldn't want to see it go away completely.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, what about we have some people that mentioned Door of Shadows as well. I know that we didn't really talk about it, but I do still think a major thing with the class tree I would still love to see is some kind of movement displacement, like either Vault of the Heavens or
Yeah,
Door of
I
Shadows
think
for sure.
displacement effect and viable interrupts are still like big things on Shadow's shopping list,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
On that note, Thought Steal is in the PvP talents now. It's a work in
Yes,
progress that is an interrupt as a PvP talent that gives access, I think, even for Discipline and Holy
it
for the
it,
kick.
it works the way Unholy's. It works the way Death Knight's old Dark Simulacrum used to.
Yeah. Which is really interesting that because their argument I think at the time for not giving an interrupt to Holy and Disc or putting it in the class tree was because it would make PvP too unbalanced. So I was kind of surprised that they went ahead and just added it as a PvP talent.
I mean, I don't necessarily know how flexible Holy and Disc's PvP talent choices are. They
Sure.
might not even like be able to take this because their like core throughput kit is their PvP talents. Because that's how Discipline used to be. So
Yeah, well,
that's
that's
definitely a
what I mean
potential
though. But if
concern.
it's as strong as they were saying it was, I don't know.
Yeah,
I still would
I
love
mean,
to have a kick in the class tree that's like just a kick on like a 24-second cooldown, and then you can upgrade it to silence in the shadow tree or something.
I mean, I think that like we're kind of going down the path of we would like Shadow's class tree to be more shadowy, and
Yeah.
because like things like Holy Nova and Rhapsody, Words of the Pious,
Or put Shining
Unwavering
Force in
Will,
there,
I
you know?
guess. Like there are like things in the tree that just don't necessarily need to be available to Shadow Priest that could have more viable options that only Shadow would make sense to thematically have, because overloading the Spectre with utility and thematic like things that Shadow needs that Dispriest and Holy probably shouldn't have is still causing problems.
Yeah.
I agree partially, but I also disagree partially. I feel like the tree having a Holy and a Discipline and a Shadow side makes sense thematically. Having the tree mix all of them together What I do not like is the fact that there are nodes that just don't do anything at all for us. And Wavering Will does nothing at all for us. It would be nice to have an alternative option, or just add it to the Unwavering Will node that does something.
It gives me my 10% DR 0.1 seconds faster.
No. Okay. It doesn't do anything.
It doesn't do anything, yeah, I agree.
We only really take it just to take Angel's Mercy, for example.
Yes.
Like, Angel's Mercy is really nice.
Or you want Power of Life, right?
And there's other stuff like...
We take Holy Nova to get to Spell Warding as well.
Yeah,
That feels horrendous.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I don't necessarily know they need to scrap the whole Holy Disc Shadow thing. I think that's a really nice thing. I would just like a bit more synergy on some of these nodes for us. Like, where is it? There's one that's like Power Shield increases the damage of Holy Nova and Smite. We don't have Smite.
It's not even synergy,
we don't
right?
press Holy Nova.
We're just saying, I think the goal is, right, every talent in the class tree should have you should be able to make a reasonable case for why you want to take it for all 3 specs. And I think what we're saying is there are just nodes in there where you cannot make a reasonable case to pick it except for occasional pathing reasons, right? That's not good enough.
I'd agree. I think that's kind of also speaks to something we keep bringing up every time we have any sort of like larger conversation, and that's that like Priest is a very unique spec in that Priest is a very unique class in that it exists as 2 specs that are diametrically opposed to each other and one that tries to blur the lines between the two.
Yeah, I mean it's hard, right? Like having, especially with hybrid classes, like it's definitely challenging, but I think it's doable, even if it's not like I would take it all the time kind of a thing. Like even if, because I think some people were looking forward to the class tree design, saying like, oh yeah, you can pick these talents and then get good off healing as a Shadow Priest. Like that was something people were looking forward to, right? But realistically, it just didn't materialize. Doesn't do that, right? So even that case is kind of niche, where it's like, yeah, we're not saying that every single talent needs to be viable for like a damaging Shadow build. I think there's more creativity they could do there.
Yeah, I'd agree. But I do like that we have Priest spells back and Shadow feels more like a Priest again. Like that's a big win for the class tree as a whole for me. Like that's a really big thematic win.
For sure.
I just feel like the whole like most of the left side being very just like healing buttons.
Yeah.
And like especially like healing buttons that we don't really have or like have any relevance to us is like a big concern, especially with the amount of point investment it takes to get over there.
Also, hallucinations doesn't work on any of those heals, which is a big punch in the gut. Like we don't get, if we press like one of those heals, we get literally nothing other than the heal. It would be nice to get hallucinations and sanity from them. It's not much.
If you got insanity from pressing POM, you might actually press POM.
Yeah.
If it was okay.
It would be a movement filler, at least. That would be okay.
That'd be cool. Like that reminds me of the old Mr. Pandaria days.
Yeah, palm weaving, or whatever it was, together you can twist of fate.
Although hopefully you don't have to master spell, otherwise you don't have mana for that.
Oh, okay, right. I'm gonna have like a 5-minute rant about this.
Okay,
for the
go
moment.
for it. That's fair.
Like master spell costs 62% more mana than it did in Shadowlands, and I do not understand why.
It's so awful on Razageth, man.
It's awful on Razageth. It's awful in dungeons. It's just I don't understand.
Yeah, Temple of the Jade Serpent last boss. When, like, if you have to master spell, if you're like massing on cooldown for the debuffs, right? You can't press anything else, otherwise you go.
Yeah, in. It's like why does Halo and Mindgames also just strictly cost mana on top of that? Like obviously that's because they're disc and holy spells, but like you've given me like buttons in my own actual DPS rotation that tax my mana, and then master spell, which is an enormous tax of mana.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah.
It's kind of ridiculous, especially with powered shields like relevance on fights like that, where like you do need to survive as well. It's awful.
Yeah. I don't know. I really think the improved master spell talent should just reduce the mana cost, like the Conduit did in Shadowlands.
It should. Maybe 62% is a bit much. Obviously, that's like the result of the Conduit scaling up and up and up and up and up as the expansion went on.
Yeah.
But like 20% would be enough. Just like enough that like I don't feel like I can't press buttons in between Master Spelling on cooldown.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak too much on like Holy and Discs mana cost for this spell because I don't obviously know that as much, but at least for Shadow, it's way too high. I think.
Most of them yell at me if I ever suggest they should be pressing Master Spell for
It's
any
a lot of
reason at all.
mana even for them. Yeah, I know. I was doing Broodkeeper and I was healing it. Unfortunately, I didn't get to play Shadow in that fight. And they were like, "Yeah, just mass dispel the roots." And I'm like, I can't do this. Like, it's
I
not.
don't have mana for this.
But then
The
as
fight
Shadow,
lasts
it's just
too
like,
long.
yep, there it is. But then you can't press Powered
Yeah.
Shield, so yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit concerning, especially on a fight like that where you want to be like abusing your protective light uptime as well, like, and where Halo's really good and Mind Games is really good. Like, you have so much to be spending your mana on in that fight.
Yeah. And then to kind of finish off the thought, what do you guys think about kind of Halo Divine Star staying as well? I know there was they do have some like side benefits. Like Divine Star is kind of nice if you want that another global for movement that's up relatively often. It is kind of
I'd
hard
like
to
them
use
to-
with the range being 24 yards, but you know,
Yeah.
off healing for Halo and Divine Star is good. Is that good
Yeah,
enough? Is it worth it?
I just the button for the sake of button is like the kind of weird thing I dislike about them, but like they're good enough at healing and they are relevant enough that I find uses for them all over the place, and I want to keep them both.
Yeah.
Divine Star, even like, despite the fact that I barely used it, I used it on Kurog and it felt like I was doing Malkarok again. And Malkarok Divine Star was very, very silly back in the day.
Yeah, I still wish we had Cascade.
Yeah, Cascade's a very different spell to Halo and Divine
Shoot,
Star.
old man.
It does
I
it does
know.
one or the other.
But I want it.
I mean, I want it as well, but I want it to come back for not as a button for the sake of button, which is
fair.
what it would be.
Someone
if it
actually
came
did
back.
suggest, I don't know what you guys think about it being a choice note against Shadow Crash, I think, and having
Shadow Crash or
Cascade
Cascade. Yeah,
apply VT instead.
I kind of like the idea of just having Shadow Crash removed and outright replaced with Cascade for similar purposes.
I mean, I just hate Shadow Crash, so yeah.
Yeah, I do as well. I'm mildly concerned about what... I mean, Cascade also is just not a button you press on single targets. So that kind of also solves that problem.
Yep.
I mean, I like the idea of Cascade bolts applying BT than just bouncing around like constantly. That feels really nice.
But
That's a cool
I don't know if we want to rely on that for VTs though. That would be maybe.
I mean,
I don't know.
I mean, Cascade used to have a target cap of 16.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But
So
it wasn't instant,
it
right?
would
So like you'd have to wait to get all those targets dotted.
It would bounce around a bit, but like it would be
Yeah.
based on distance. So like if it wasn't having to travel very far, it wouldn't take very long to bounce and dot things up.
Yeah, depending on how it worked, maybe it's. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's been so long since we
I
played
mean,
with it. Right?
you can't have that. Like, we can't have spread target dotting. It does not.
Yeah, that's another thing.
acceptable.
You can't have something that mass dots everything within a 40-yard range. I'd also point out that the range of Cascade is based on each individual bounce. So you could actually dot things over like 100-yard circle. It'd be ridiculous.
Yeah, so probably not a thing, but I think in general, I'm just a fan of Cascade. I would like to see it come back, but
I am also a fan of Cascade.
yeah, it's sad.
But I would like to see it come back as something more than just press on cooldown for damage.
Yeah.
We should probably go back to questions. We have not done any in a while.
No,
Yeah, let's go back to questions.
That was a question.
That was a question. It got a lot
It
of
was.
tangents in it, but it was a question.
We were a 15-minute tangent, yeah?
Yeah, a little bit.
All right, okay.
Let's see.
Next,
Any other fun ones that stick out here? Let's see.
let me have a look.
What do you guys think about having a Legion style Voidform back for a single target build? I mean, I would love to see some kind of gameplay loop added to Voidform that was more than just what we have today. Like, I think adding ramp somewhere would be how you would do it. I don't think they'll ever go back to the Drain play style again.
Yeah, I don't think they're ever going to open the can of worms of Voidform Drain ever again.
I think they tried to do that in Shadowlands and it didn't work in the beta. Do you guys remember that?
Yes, I do.
was
I
not
would
good.
not.
It's bad.
I would not be against them attempting that again with a bit more of an actual focus on doing it well, as opposed to a half-hearted idea to placate people who wanted a talent build back.
Yeah.
If you wanted a drain, you'd have to have the ramp also reduce insanity cost of Devouring Plague as it ramped.
Or you
Because
just have
then
the
eventually you'd have the choice that I can press a Devouring Plague now for damage, but I won't generate insanity, so my Void Form won't get extended.
Yeah, or you just
And that would be a meaningful choice.
Or you just have while you're in Void Form, Defiring Plague turns into Void Bolt.
Yeah, that works too.
That also
That works way better.
removes the problem people have of like, why does my cooldown turn into a button I have to press? Which has been like a weird but like valid-ish concern with Voidform for a very, very long
Also
time.
makes sense, because Voidform gives you full mastery, so you don't need a variant plague anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's like an actual way they could go. That would also give like a very distinct difference between what Voidform does and what other things do.
Does.
I also think that you would probably want to make Voidform into like a 3-minute CD at that point.
Ooh, don't say that again.
It's not like 3
Banned.
minutes. We have
Banned.
2-minute cooldowns. It doesn't sync up with PI. Don't do that.
Okay, yeah,
Banned.
that's fair enough.
Leave it on 2.
Valid. 2-minute CD would be fine at that point, but that would give it enough of a distinctive purpose for sure.
And if you made it ramp and like juice up, it would be like a Venta Boomkin thing you do every 2 minutes, but not quite as powerful.
Yeah, that'd be good. I'd like that. I like the idea of that.
It doesn't necessarily need it. It's like my 2 cents to that you don't actually need a drain. The whole extending by spending also does the same thing, but just in a less.
It does it in a less visceral way.
It doesn't hurt people as much. Let's just say
it's not as punishing. I think it's the way.
Yeah, but it's also less visceral, like from a gameplay perspective, which is something that people did really find very interesting and a big draw from Voidform was like how well the spec gave you feedback on what you were doing.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I don't know. I think what we're saying though is there's for sure more room to add more identity into Voidform that is somewhat akin to what we had in previous expansions. But like we mentioned before, if you want to double down on and do that, I don't know if like spending all that time on one half of our cooldowns is a lot with Dark Ascension being a thing.
It's like to make Shadow all things to all people, it has to be like 4 specs worth of work for 1 spec.
Yeah.
And that's just not feasible.
It's a lot. Although I would love to see them go forward. I think the biggest quick fix really to solve and someone didn't ask this, are Voidform and DA interchangeable in 10.1? The answer is undeniably no. You play Dark Ascension all the time. One small fix that I think would do enough as like a band-aid would just be to give Voidform slap 10% damage on it and call it a day.
I'd go like dot damage on Voidform, or like try and make dot interactions on Voidform, because then you have like an actual clear DA does direct damage, Voidform does dot damage kind of split.
Yeah.
And also you'd be able to then like do, I don't know, the Mind Flay Insanity, Mind Spy Insanity differential like problem with globals makes it really difficult to like argue that Voidform should be the Mind Flay based build, because it's kind of the opposite right now.
Yeah.
But again, like that's like reverse as well. Like why am I playing the direct damage spell alongside the cooldown that I want to be focused on non-direct damage?
And that's why I say I think they should force that
choice.
Have
the real estate.
I don't know if those should be 2 separate choices, right? Like I think if you pick Dark Ascension, you just get mines. You know what I mean? Like just make them, like directly couple them. Don't make them 2 separate nodes. Just be like, yep, you're Dark Ascension.
I think at that point you're kind of like veering away from what Blizzard want talent trees to be, and it kind of just comes back to Shadow Priest is a special case and needs handling and needs special treatment.
Well,
which is it
would be nice if they said that though, right? Like that's kind of what we're saying. Like we're getting some snippets of like their thought process for this, you know. But I think we need more if you want us to give us like more poignant feedback. But
yeah, I do want to just kind of like add on to this. Like I understand for people playing other specs, like the Shadow does not deserve more development time than other specs, especially ones that are facing similar or problems with the same magnitude as Shadow has. We're all just wanting the best for the things that we do and spend our time on in game.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, while we keep saying it's not a competition, time is finite, and we're wishful thinking is wishful thinking. It's not desire to be prioritized over anybody else.
Yeah, for sure. We're all just here because we care about Shadow. We want it to be fun. No one's advocating for, moving time away from other specs to do that. It's just
yes, exactly.
us giving feedback. So,
indeed.
All right, we've been going for quite a while. About to hit the 2-hour mark. Probably a good time to call it. But this was really cool. I'm glad we had a good discussion. Probably something I would like to do more of these leading up to 10.1, especially as we get kind of more changes and things like that. So we'll see. Hopefully we have some more stuff to talk about. If we get a build this week, maybe we do another one similar time next week.
Maybe, yeah.
Get some other people in here. I know we had some other suggestions of other guests to kind of rotate in.
Yeah, it'd be cool to get away from the kind of Shadow Priest Theorycrafter Boys Club.
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah. Yeah, good point. Any women want to come on that know Shadow Priest? It'd be good.
I mean, that was more Boys Club was kind of meant in the like
I know.
non-literal sense, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, looking forward to adding some more people and kind of rotating them around. It's just we haven't done this in a while. I know we had a lot of our thoughts we wanted to get across. So
Anybody want to come teach public how to PvP?
oh god, oh man, that's
Like
that'd be a
like,
fun
I
video
feel
series.
more just like from that perspective, because I understand like I'm not as well versed with things as I used to be. I try to keep like vaguely
Yeah.
in the know, but I'm not pushing for like heroes and glads like I used to. There are individuals who I think would be really good to bring on and talk about like aspects of the game that we don't know as much about.
Yeah, especially when pitching suggestions, because obviously we throw things out that we don't always understand the PvP implications of, or vice versa. So, yeah, would love that'd be a fun dialogue for sure. Maybe like Anboni or someone else.
Yeah,
that'd be fun.
Exactly.
All right, well, look forward to future podcasts. I would like to keep doing these as time permits, but again, big thank you to folks that tuned in, and then Saeldur, Ellipsis, big thanks for hopping in. I know it's a weird hour for everyone, but I appreciate it, and thanks for watching, everybody. And like I mentioned before, this will all be uploaded to YouTube later on as like an edited version if you want to watch that, or the VOD is also up if you missed part of it. So,
yep,
that's all we got for today. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will catch you guys later.
See you with a new build that will come in a week that changes everything entirely.
Yeah, watch for crazy new Sims, new tech incoming.
Oh no.